I never imagined my life would unravel in such a spectacular way. What if everything you thought was love was just a carefully crafted illusion? The truth wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. Stay with me as I take you through the affair that destroyed everything I thought I had. I stood in front of the mirror, carefully applying my lipstick, the deep crimson shade a stark contrast to the neutrality of my beige dress. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed my hair into a sleek updo, ignoring the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. The gala was nothing new, a lavish charity event my husband Daniel attended every year, dragging me along to showcase the perfect wife by his side. He'd already left, claiming he had to meet with some colleagues beforehand, leaving me to arrive on my own. As I fastened the delicate diamond bracelet around my wrist, a gift from Daniel on our anniversary last year, I couldn't help but feel the weight of its meaning. It had been a beautiful gift, but like so many things in our marriage, it was a surface-level gesture. We were the picture-perfect couple in public. Successful, well-dressed, admired. Behind closed doors, the silence between us stretched longer each night. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I was greeted with the clinking of champagne glasses, soft laughter, and the low hum of a string quartet playing in the background. The room shimmered with opulence, crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. I scanned the crowd looking for Daniel, but he was nowhere to be found. Then I saw him, Liam. He stood near the bar, engaged in conversation, but the moment his gaze met mine, everything else faded. I had seen him before at previous events, exchanged pleasantries, maybe even shared a fleeting glance that lasted a second too long, but tonight something shifted. His dark eyes held me in place, challenging, enticing. He was effortlessly confident, dressed in a tailored black suit that fit him far too well, his tie slightly loosened, like he was just a little too comfortable in a room full of carefully curated perfection. I exhaled, forcing myself to look away. This was danger. Emily. The sound of my name made me stiffen before I turned and found myself face to face with Julia, one of the socialites Daniel often mingled with. Her designer-clad presence was as perfectly arranged as the rest of the evening. "I didn't see you arrive with Daniel." Her tone was friendly but laced with curiosity, a subtle dig wrapped in politeness. I offered a smile, the kind I'd perfected over years of playing the role of the devoted wife. "He had some business to tend to, you know how he..." Julia's lips curved, eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Of course. Always working." The conversation was brief, but by the time she had disappeared into the crowd, my mind was already elsewhere. I felt Liam's presence before I saw him again, this time moving toward me with a deliberate ease that sent my pulse skittering. "You always look this lost at these things, or is tonight special?" His voice was smooth, touched with amusement. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze, careful not to let my own betray the way my body reacted to him. "I'm not lost," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. He tilted his head, studying me. "No, I suppose not. But you don't seem entirely here either." I shouldn't have entertained this. I should have excused myself, found Daniel, played the role I was meant to play. But instead, I let my lips part slightly, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming. "And what about you? You seem perfectly at ease." Liam chuckled, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "I've had enough of these nights to know that if you're going to suffer through them, you might as well enjoy the company." I felt the shift between us, the air tightening, a current forming that neither of us acknowledged, but both of us felt. My breath hitched slightly when he leaned in, close enough that I could catch the faintest trace of his cologne, something warm and intoxicating. "Tell me, Emily, when was the last time you had a real conversation at one of these events?" The question lingered in the space between us, teasing, provoking. I wanted to lie, to pretend that my life wasn't a perfectly curated script with no room for improvisation, but the truth was, I couldn't remember. "Maybe tonight's the first," I admitted softly. His eyes darkened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he smiled, slow and knowing. "Then I'd say we should make it count." The conversation drifted, but the tension remained, lingering in every stolen glance, every accidental brush of our hands as he handed me a fresh glass of champagne. I wasn't drunk, but I felt intoxicated by his presence, by the way he looked at me like he saw something beneath the carefully constructed image I had become. Somewhere in the crowd, Daniel finally appeared, his hand resting on the small of my back in a move so familiar it should have reassured me, but instead it felt foreign. I turned to introduce Liam, but before I could, he gave me a knowing smile and disappeared into the crowd. That night, as Daniel and I drove home, I replayed every moment in my head, the way Liam had watched me, the way my body had responded without my permission. I barely registered Daniel's words as he talked about the business deals he had closed that evening. Lying in bed beside my husband later that night, I stared at the ceiling, my body still thrumming with something I hadn't felt in years. Liam had ignited something in me, and I wasn't sure I could put it out. The next morning, I woke up to the familiar sound of Daniel's shower running, the steady stream of water muffling the silence that always filled the house whenever we weren't speaking, which lately felt like most of the time. I turned onto my side, staring at the empty space beside me, running my fingers across the cool sheets where Daniel had slept. There was no warmth left, not from the night before, not from the weeks or months before that. It should have made me sad, but all I felt was the ghost of something else. Something that had started the moment Liam's eyes met mine last night. I stretched beneath the covers, my body still humming with the remnants of unspoken tension, the kind that had kept me tossing and turning in bed long after Daniel had fallen asleep. I had replayed every moment, every glance, every carefully chosen word between Liam and me, wondering if I had imagined it all. But I knew I hadn't. I could still hear his voice, still feel the way my skin had burned when he leaned just a little too close, still remember the way my heart had betrayed me, beating just a little too fast in his presence. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, scrolling mindlessly through messages, emails, social media, anything to distract myself from the thoughts creeping in. But then, my breath hitched. A message. An unknown number. I hope last night was worth remembering. I stared at the words, my pulse stuttering, my thumb hovering over the screen as my mind raced through the possibilities. It had to be him. No one else would have sent something so cryptic, yet unmistakably clear. My fingers trembled as I typed back, hesitating before pressing send. "Who is this?" A minute passed. Then another. My heart pounded against my ribs, a mixture of dread and anticipation coiling in my stomach. Then, my phone vibrated again. "You already know." I sucked in a breath, my fingers tightening around the device as I swallowed the lump in my throat. This was dangerous, stupid, reckless, but the truth settled in my bones before I could fight it. I liked the danger. I liked the way my body reacted to it, the way my mind was already creating scenarios I had no business. The bathroom door opened, steam spilling into the room as Daniel stepped out with a towel wrapped around his waist. He barely glanced at me as he moved toward the closet, the routine so practiced it felt almost mechanical. "I have meetings all day," he said, his voice even, detached. "I probably won't be home until late." I nodded, slipping my phone beneath the pillow before sitting up, stretching my arms above my head as if I hadn't just received a message that had shaken me more than anything my husband had said to me in weeks. "Okay," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. "I might go out for a bit." Daniel didn't question it. He never did. By the time he left, I was already gripping my phone again, staring at the message, my mind racing through every possible response. But before I could think too hard about it, my fingers had already moved, my curiosity winning over my conscience. "Why are you messaging me?" Another reply came almost instantly. "'Cause I wanted to see if you'd answer." A part of me wanted to stop, to throw my phone across the room, to ignore the heat curling inside me. But another part, the part that had been starved for excitement, for something outside the dull, predictable rhythm of my life, kept me locked in place. And what if I hadn't? Then I would have found another way to get your attention. I exhaled slowly, pressing the phone against my lips as I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was a bad idea, the worst kind of idea. And yet, I found myself smiling, biting my lip as I typed the next words. "And why do you want my attention so badly, Liam?" There was no response for a few minutes, and for a moment I wondered if I had pushed too far, if maybe this was all just a harmless game and he had already lost interest. But then my phone buzzed again. "Because I think you want mine just as much." I felt the air leave my lungs, a slow, trembling exhale as my body betrayed me, my skin tingling, my stomach flipping in a way I hadn't felt in years. He was right, and that was the most dangerous part of all. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself that I had control over the situation, that I could stop any time I wanted, that this was nothing more than an innocent flirtation, something to break the monotony of my days, nothing more. But by the time the sun set, I was already dressed in something that wasn't meant for a simple evening out. The black dress hugged my curves in all the right places, the heels gave me an extra inch of confidence I didn't quite feel, and the deep red lipstick felt like a quiet rebellion against everything I was supposed to be. I didn't tell Daniel where I was going. I didn't need to. He hadn't asked. When I arrived at the bar, the one Liam had casually mentioned in his last message, I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, my heart thudding painfully against my ribs. The dim lighting cast everything in a golden glow, the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses filling the air. And then I saw him. Liam was already seated in a booth near the back, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze locked onto me the second I walked in. He didn't wave me over, he didn't smile. He just watched, waiting, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. I took a slow breath, pushing down the nerves, clawing at my chest before making my way to him, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. When I reached Booth, he didn't move, didn't shift to make room, just tilted his head slightly, eyes trailing over me in a way that made my skin prickle with awareness. "You showed up," he said, his voice low, rough around the edges. I slid into the seat across from him, crossing my legs as I met his gaze head on. "Did you doubt that I would?" His lips curved, something dark and knowing flickering in his expression. "Not for a second." I should have left then, should have walked away, ignored the pull between us, reminded myself that I was married, that this was a mistake. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for the drink the waiter had just placed in front of me, my fingers brushing against the cool glass as I lifted it to my lips. And as Liam watched me, his gaze never wavering, never breaking, I knew. This was just the beginning. The first sip of my drink burned slightly as it slid down my throat, but I welcomed the sensation, letting it anchor me to the moment. Liam's eyes were locked onto mine, studying me with an intensity that sent a shiver up my spine, though I refused to show it. I wasn't a woman who wavered easily, at least not until now. The way he watched me, like he already knew every thought running through my mind, made my pulse quicken. There was something about him that felt dangerous, but not in the way I should fear. It was the kind of danger that called to something deep inside me, something reckless and impatient and tired of pretending that everything in my life was fine. Liam leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, his whiskey glass held loosely between his fingers. So tell me, Emily, did you hesitate before coming here, or did you already know the answer when I sent that message? His voice was smooth, deliberate, every syllable rolling off his tongue with an ease that made me uneasy. I took another sip, slower this time, allowing the warmth to spread through me before answering. I don't make a habit of meeting strange men in dimly lit bars. The words came out cool, measured, even though I knew he would see right through them. He smirked, tilting his head slightly, as if he was considering my response, weighing it before deciding how he wanted to play the next move. No, I don't suppose you do," he murmured, his voice dropping just enough to send another tremor through me. "But I also don't think you came here to play it safe." The way he said it, like he already had me figured out, like he could read between the cracks in my carefully constructed life, made me clench my jaw slightly. I should have been offended, but instead, I felt something else entirely. Exposed. Seen. It had been so long since someone had really looked at me, not just as Daniel's wife, not just as a fixture at charity events and dinner parties, but as a woman with her own thoughts, her own desires, her own restlessness, that she had never been able to fully put into words. I exhaled, setting my glass down before meeting his gaze head on. "And what do you think I came here for, Liam?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back against the booth, one arm draped casually along the back of the seat, his expression unreadable. "I think," he said slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, "that you're trying to convince yourself that this is harmless, that you can walk away whenever you want, that you're still in control." My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass, but I didn't look away. "And you don't think I am?" A slow smile spread across his face, but there was no amusement in it, only something dark and knowing. "No," he said simply. The air between us grew heavier, the noise of the bar fading into the background until it felt like we were the only two people in the room. I should have been offended, should have stood up and left right then and there, but I didn't. I stayed, letting the moment stretch, letting the weight of my own decisions settle over me. Liam shifted slightly, his fingers trailing along the rim of his glass before he spoke again. "Tell me something, Emily. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" The question caught me off guard, striking a nerve I hadn't realized was still so raw. I opened my mouth, then closed it, searching for an answer that wouldn't make me sound as lost as I felt. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice quieter than before. Liam nodded as if he had expected that answer, as if it only confirmed something he already knew. "That's a shame," he murmured, "because you should." Something about the way he said it, the way he made it sound so simple, so obvious, made my chest tighten. I swallowed hard, looking away for the first time that evening. "And what about you?" I asked, forcing a lighter tone. "Do you always make a habit of luring married women into dangerous conversations?" Liam chuckled, the sound low and deep. "Only the interesting ones," he said, his eyes gleaming. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't fight the smile that tugged at my lips. It was infuriating, the way he had already gotten under my skin, the way he made me feel like I was playing a game I hadn't even realized I had entered. But what scared me the most was how much I liked it. The night stretched on, the conversation drifting between playful banter and moments of startling honesty. I told him things I hadn't even admitted to myself, about the loneliness, the exhaustion of living a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow underneath. He listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel both comforted and exposed at the same time. By the time I glanced at my phone and realized how late it had gotten, I felt like I had stepped into another world entirely, one where I wasn't Daniel's wife, where I wasn't bound by expectations and appearances, where I was just a woman sitting across from a man who made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. I should go, I said reluctantly, setting my empty glass down. Liam didn't try to stop me. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, as I slid out of the booth and reached for my purse. But just as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. Emily. I turned back, my breath catching in my throat as I met his gaze. This doesn't have to end here. The words sent a sharp thrill through me, something dangerous and exhilarating curling in my stomach. I should have said no. I should have walked away without looking back. But instead, I held his gaze for a moment longer, my pulse pounding in my ears, before finally whispering, "I know." And then I left, stepping out into the cool night air, my heart racing, my mind spinning, my body already betraying me by wanting more. I barely remembered the drive home, the city lights blurring past me as I replayed every moment, every glance, every carefully chosen word that had led me to this point. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark, Daniel already asleep inside. I slipped off my heels at the door, my movement slow, deliberate, as if I could still feel Liam's eyes on me, still hear the echo of his voice in my ears. As I slid beneath the covers beside my sleeping husband, my body felt restless, my skin too warm, my thoughts tangled in ways I couldn't begin to unravel. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding against my ribs, knowing deep down that I had already crossed a line, even if I hadn't fully stepped over it yet. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to stop myself. The next morning, I found myself staring at my phone again, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating whether or not to send the message I had been thinking about all night. But before I could decide, my screen lit up with a new notification. "Liam, I hope you didn't forget about last night, because I haven't." A sharp electric thrill shot through me, and before I could think too hard about it, I typed back a single word. "Neither have I." I hit send before I could stop myself, before I could talk myself out of it, before I could remember all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. And as I watched the message deliver, as I waited for his reply, as my pulse thrummed with something dark and exhilarating, I knew this was just the beginning. The moment I hit send, a rush of adrenaline surged through my veins, my body betraying me with the undeniable thrill of anticipation. My phone remained in my hand, my fingers gripping it tighter as I waited, telling myself I wouldn't check it every 5 seconds, wouldn't stare at the screen like a desperate woman seeking validation. But I did. Every second stretched endlessly, my heartbeat syncing with the silence, the unanswered message a taunting reminder of the dangerous game I was playing. I barely noticed Daniel moving through the house, his routine so predictable it was like background noise. He kissed me absent-mindedly on the cheek before grabbing his keys and heading toward the door, already on a call with someone from his office. I nodded at the appropriate moments, responding just enough to keep up the illusion that I was the same devoted wife he thought I was. And the front door shut behind him, the house fell into silence, the weight of it pressing down on me in a way it never had before. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it in my rush to see the screen, my breath hitching as I read the message. "Meet me today, same place, same time, unless you're scared." A slow exhale escaped my lips as my fingers hovered over the keyboard, my pulse quickening, my mind racing through every excuse I could conjure. I could say no, tell him this had gone too far, pretend I was still the woman who would never cross this line, but I wasn't. I had already made my decision the moment I replied to him last night, the moment I let myself want more, the moment I felt something for the first time in years and realized I wasn't ready to let it go. I typed back, my fingers moving on their own. "I'm not scared. I set my phone down, staring at the message, the finality of it sinking in. There was no going back now. The day passed in a blur of mindless tasks, my body moving on autopilot while my mind was already there, already in that dimly lit bar where I knew he would be waiting. Every hour felt excruciatingly long, stretching out like a test of my willpower, but I wasn't second-guessing myself. The guilt that should have been eating away at By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was already dressed, the same black dress hugging my curves, my makeup flawless, my lips painted that deep, bold red that made me feel like someone else. Someone braver, someone who took what she wanted without overthinking the consequences. The drive to the bar felt shorter this time, my hands steady on the wheel, my breath even despite the storm of emotions brewing inside me. When I stepped inside, my eyes found him instantly. Liam was already seated in the same booth, his glass half empty, his gaze settling on me with a slow, satisfied smirk that made my stomach tighten. I slid into the seat across from him, my heart pounding but my face unreadable. His eyes raked over me, deliberate and slow, as if he was memorizing every detail. "You came," he said, his voice carrying that same quiet confidence that had pulled me in from the start. I met his gaze without hesitation. "I said I would." His smirk deepened as he leaned back, fingers tracing the rim of his glass, his movements unhurried like he had all the time in the world to unravel me piece by piece. "Most women in your position wouldn't have," he murmured. Something inside me bristled, a flicker of defiance sparking to life. "And what position is that?" His eyes darkened slightly, the amusement in them shifting into something heavier. "Married, bored, looking for something they can't admit to wanting." I should have denied it, should have played coy, but we were past that now. Instead, I tilted my head slightly, my fingers grazing the stem of my wineglass. Maybe I just got tired of pretending. Liam's gaze held mine for a moment longer before he exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head slightly. "You are something else, Emily." His words sent a thrill through me, a quiet acknowledgement that whatever this was between us, it was real. It wasn't just a game. It wasn't just some meaningless flirtation. It was something more. The night unfolded in the same intoxicating way as before, our conversation charged with unspoken promises, the tension between us crackling like a live wire. Every glance, every subtle shift of his body, every lingering moment of silence only deepened the pull between us. At some point, I became hyper-aware of the way his hand rested on the table, fingers just inches from mine. The space between us felt unbearably small, but neither of us moved, both teetering on the edge of something neither of us was ready to name. Liam leaned forward slightly, his voice lower this time, more intimate. "Tell me what you're thinking right now." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry, my fingers tightening around my glass. "I think this is dangerous." His lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "And does that excite you?" A shiver ran down my spine, my breath catching as I realized how close we were now, how easily I could close the gap, how much I wanted to. "I think you already know the answer to that," I whispered. Liam's eyes flickered with something dark, something hungry. "Say it." The challenge in his voice sent heat flooding through me, my pulse pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I exhaled slowly, my resolve unraveling, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." The word hung between us, thick with meaning, with everything we weren't saying but both understood. Liam's fingers brushed against mine, the touch light, barely there, but it sent a jolt through me so powerful I thought I might shatter. "Then stop pretending," he murmured, his voice like velvet, his breath warm against my skin. I didn't move, didn't breathe, trapped in the moment. in the unbearable pull between us. I knew that if I leaned in just a little more, if I let myself fall completely, there would be no coming back from it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I stood abruptly, my breath uneven, my body betraying me with the way it trembled. Liam's gaze flickered with surprise, but he didn't stop me, didn't say a word as I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the polished floor. But as soon as I stepped outside, I felt him behind me, his presence electric, his heat radiating against my back. Emily. I turned, my breath hitching as he stepped closer, his body just inches from mine, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. There was none. His hands found my waist, his grip firm but gentle, his breath warm against my cheek. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice raw, almost pleading. I didn't. Instead, I closed the distance between us, my lips crashing against his, the dam breaking, the tension snapping, everything else falling away until there was nothing left but this. Him. Me. The choice I had already made long before tonight. Liam groaned against my mouth, his hands tightening around me as he deepened the kiss, his body pressing against mine, solid and warm and exactly what I had been craving. My fingers tangled in his hair, my body molding against his, my mind shutting off for the first time in years. When we finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, he rested his forehead against mine, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite name. "There's no going back now," he murmured. I met his gaze, my chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths, my hand still gripping his shirt like I was afraid to let go. "I don't want to go back." The words were the most honest thing I had said in years, and I meant every single one of them. The weight of what I had done didn't hit me right away. The heat of Liam's lips still lingered on mine, my breath uneven as I stepped into my car, gripping the steering wheel with trembling fingers. The night air was cool against my skin, but it did nothing to calm the fire still burning inside me. My body felt alive in a way it hadn't in years, every nerve awakened, every inch of me hyper-aware of the decision I had just made. I had crossed the line. There was no going back. I exhaled shakily, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my lipstick slightly smudged, my pupils blown wide, my face betraying every ounce of restraint I had tried to hold on to. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, the screen illuminating the darkness. I already knew who it was before I even picked it up. "You left too soon." I swallowed hard, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out my better judgment. My body was still humming from his touch, my skin aching for more, but something inside me hesitated. I didn't regret kissing him, I didn't regret feeling something again, but the reality of it, the weight of my betrayal, was beginning to settle in the cracks of my carefully constructed world. I typed back quickly, my pulse racing. I had to. The reply came almost instantly. "You didn't want to." I let my head fall back against the seat, closing my eyes as I let out a slow, shuddering breath. He was right. I hadn't wanted to leave. If he had pulled me back, if he had asked me to stay, I would have, without hesitation, without thought. That realization terrified me more than anything else. The drive home felt endless. Every red light a reminder of how easy it had been to betray Daniel, how quickly I had let myself slip into something I once thought I was incapable of. I tried to convince myself that I could stop, that I could end this before it went any further, but the lie sat bitter on my tongue. I didn't want to stop. I wanted more. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the dim glow from the bedroom window. Daniel was home. The sight of it made my stomach twist, guilt creeping in like a slow-moving poison. I forced my breathing to steady, checking my reflection once more before stepping out of the car. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. the sound echoing in the silence. Daniel's voice startled me. "You're late." I froze, my fingers tightening around my purse as I turned to find him standing in the hallway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He was still dressed from work, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, like he had been waiting up for me. "I was out with friends," I said smoothly, forcing my voice to remain steady. "You said you'd be home late, so I didn't think you'd notice." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze sharp, dissecting, like he was looking for something just beneath the surface. For a moment, I thought he knew. That somehow he had seen me, that he had felt the shift in the air between us, that my guilt was written all over my face. "I did get home late," he said finally, his voice quieter this time, but I still noticed. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine, a subtle weight behind his words that I couldn't quite place. I forced a smile, stepping closer, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek, the motion so familiar yet so foreign all at once. He didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, letting me touch him, letting me pretend that everything was still the same. "I'm exhausted," I murmured, hoping he wouldn't push any further. "I'm going to shower and head to bed." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on me as I turned away, my steps careful, measured, forcing myself not to look back. The second I was behind the closed door of the bathroom, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, gripping the edge of the sink as I stared at my reflection. My heart was still pounding, my body still wired with the aftermath of Liam's touch. And yet, I was standing here, in the home I shared with my husband, pretending I hadn't just shattered something that could never be put back together. The water was scalding as it cascaded down my skin, but it did nothing to wash away the feeling of Liam's hands on me, the way he had pulled me in like he already knew I belonged to him. I braced my hands against the tile, my chest rising and falling in uneven breaths, my head spinning with the weight of it all. I had made a choice, and I wasn't done making it. The next morning, Daniel was already gone by the time I woke up, a single note left on the kitchen counter in his neat, precise handwriting. "Had an early meeting. See you tonight." No heart, no warmth, just words. I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers brushing over the paper before I crumpled it into a tight ball, my jaw clenching. There had been a time when I would have felt something over that, some sense of longing for the man I had once loved, the life we had built. But that time had passed. My phone buzzed, dragging me out of my thoughts. My stomach tightened the moment I saw his name. "Liam, you're thinking about me." I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening around the device. "Emily, you're awfully sure of yourself." "Liam, I don't have to be. You proved it last night." I hesitated for only a second before typing back. "Emily, what do you want?" His reply was immediate. "Liam, you already know." A sharp thrill shot through me, my pulse quickening as I stared at the screen. I did know, and I wanted it too. I didn't overthink it this time. I didn't let guilt hold me back, didn't let the weight of my marriage, my vows, my past decisions keep me from what I wanted, what I needed. I grabbed my keys, my heart hammering in my chest as I stepped outside, the sun blinding as I climbed into my car. The road stretched ahead of me, endless possibilities unraveling with every mile. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. When I arrived at his place, the door was already open, like he had been waiting for me. My breath hitched as I stepped inside, the air thick with something unspoken, something heavy. Liam was standing by the window, his back to me, the muscles in his shoulders tensing slightly before he turned, his eyes locking onto mine with that same intensity that had unraveled me from the start. "You didn't hesitate this time," he murmured. I didn't speak, I didn't need to. Liam took a slow step forward, then another, until he was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him, his hands reaching for my waist, pulling me flush against him. My breath caught as his fingers tangled in my hair, tilting my chin up until our lips were just a whisper apart. "Tell me you don't want this," he murmured, his voice rough, his breath warm against my skin. I couldn't. Instead, I closed the distance between us, my lips crashing against his, the last thread of restraint snapping as I gave in completely. There was no turning back now, and I didn't want to. The morning after felt different. The weight of what I had done should have settled deep in my bones, should have crushed me under the unbearable truth of my betrayal, but all I felt was a quiet sense of inevitability, like this was always meant to happen. Like every choice I had made up until this moment had led me straight into Liam's arms, into the fire that had consumed me so completely that I wasn't sure I could ever step away from it again. I stretched beneath the sheets, my body sore in the most satisfying way, every inch of me still tingling with the memory of his hands, his lips, the way he had made me feel like I was something more than just a wife living in the shadow of a marriage that had lost its light. I turned my head slowly, my heart skipping a beat as I found Liam already awake, propped up on one elbow, watching me with a lazy smile that sent warmth curling in my stomach. "Good morning," he murmured, reaching out to trace a finger along my bare shoulder, his touch feather-light but electric all the same. I exhaled, shifting closer, letting myself bask in the moment just a little longer. "It is," I admitted, surprised by how much I meant it. Liam chuckled softly, his fingers trailing lower, his touch possessive, like he had already decided that I was his. Maybe I was. No regret? The question should have felt heavier, but it didn't. I searched for guilt, for shame, for the sickening realization that I had destroyed the life I had spent years building. But all I found was a quiet acceptance. There was no undoing what had happened, no rewinding time, no pretending that I could slip back into my old life like nothing had changed. I met his gaze, my voice steady. "None." Liam's eyes darkened with something unreadable before he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a slow, deliberate kiss that made my pulse stutter. "Good," he murmured against my mouth. "Because I don't either." The moment stretched between us, heavy with unspoken promises, with the unshakable truth that whatever this was, it was far from over. But reality had a way of creeping in, of reminding me that the world outside these walls still existed, that I still had a husband, a life, a facade that was waiting for me to return to it. I pulled away reluctantly, my fingers tracing idle patterns against Liam's chest as I exhaled. I should go. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something dangerous and knowing. "Do you want to?" I swallowed hard, because the answer was no. I wanted to stay, wanted to lose myself in him again, wanted to pretend that I wasn't still tethered to another man, to another life. But wanting and doing were two different things. "It's complicated," I admitted finally. Liam smirked, shifting to hover over me, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face before he spoke. It doesn't have to be." But it was, and we both knew it. I dressed in silence, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me, despite the way Liam watched me with a patience that only made it harder to walk away. When I finally turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "I meant what I said, Emily. This doesn't have to end here." I hesitated for only a second before stepping out the door, my heart slamming against my ribs, my breath coming too fast as I forced myself to drive home, to step back into the world I had tried so hard to forget. But the moment I walked through the front door, I knew something was wrong. The house was too quiet, too still, and the second I stepped into the living room, my stomach dropped. Daniel was sitting on the couch, his hands clasped together, his expression unreadable, and beside him was Liam's wife. My breath caught in my throat, the blood draining from my face as I took an unsteady step back, my pulse hammering so loudly I could barely hear the silence stretching between us. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. Daniel stood slowly, his gaze sharp, assessing, and when he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "Sit down, Emily." Panic clawed at my chest, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, to deny, to find a way out of whatever this was. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Liam's wife, Rebecca, tilted her head slightly, her eyes locking onto mine with a quiet, almost chilling intensity. "You look surprised," she said, her voice smooth, controlled. "Did you really think he would leave me for you?" The world tilted on its axis, the walls closing in around me, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Daniel exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening as he shook his head. "I know everything, Emily." The room spun, my lungs tightening, the weight of his words slamming into me like a freight train. He knew. He had known all along. My knees buckled slightly, but I forced myself to stay standing, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long?" Daniel's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite anger, something colder. "Long enough." Rebecca leaned back, crossing her legs gracefully, her gaze unwavering. "You're not the first, you know. He does this when he gets bored. Finds a new toy, makes her believe she's different, that he'll leave me, that she's worth the risk." She exhaled, shaking her head. "But he never does." The words sliced through me, sharp and merciless, stripping me bare in ways I hadn't expected. My breath came short and shallow, my body trembling with the force of my own stupidity. Daniel took a slow step forward, his voice quieter now, but no less brutal. "You were never going to win, Emily. You were just another pawn." The truth crashed into me, shattering whatever illusions I had left, leaving me raw and exposed and utterly, irreversibly broken. I had destroyed my marriage, risked everything, for a man who had never intended to choose me. Liam had never been mine. My throat tightened, my chest aching as I forced myself to meet Daniel's gaze, searching for anything. Anger, hatred, pain. But there was nothing, just cold resignation. "I'll have the divorce papers sent over," he said, his voice detached, final. "You can leave now." I opened my mouth to protest, to beg, to explain, but there was nothing left to say. I had lost everything. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, the cool morning air hitting my skin like a slap, the weight of my mistakes pressing down on me with every step. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had nowhere left to go. The sound of my heels clicking against the pavement was the only thing grounding me in reality as I walked aimlessly through the empty streets. The world around me felt distant, like I was watching it through a thick layer of glass, detached, weightless, numb. The morning air was crisp, but I barely noticed the chill as I replayed everything in my head. Liam's deception, Rebecca's knowing smirk, Daniel's emotionless voice telling me it was over. It wasn't just over, it had been over long before tonight. I should have felt something, maybe devastation, anger, regret, but all I felt was exhaustion, a deep, soul-crushing weariness that made my limbs heavy, my steps slower. I had nothing left, no home, no husband, no lover, no carefully constructed illusion of the life I had tried so hard to protect. I had burned it all to the ground, and now I was walking through the ashes, completely and utterly alone. I reached into my purse, fingers trembling as I pulled out my phone. I had no idea who I was trying to call, no idea what I even wanted to say, but the need for connection, for something familiar, clawed at me. But when I looked down at the screen, I hesitated. There were no missed calls, no messages from Daniel, nothing from Liam. I was already forgotten. I stuffed the phone back into my purse, blinking back the sting behind my eyes as I kept walking. The streets blurred together, every corner looking the same, every building blending into the next. I wasn't sure how long I walked, but by the time I finally stopped, I found myself in front of a small motel, the neon sign flickering above the entrance, buzzing in the quiet. I checked in without thinking, without even knowing how long I planned to stay, handing over my credit card with hands that still smelled faintly of Liam's cologne. The thought made my stomach twist, shame creeping in where regret should have been. The room was small, dimly lit, the air stale with the scent of cheap cleaning products and the faint trace of cigarette smoke. I set my purse down on the nightstand, my body moving mechanically as I peeled off my dress, letting it pool around my ankles before stepping into the bathroom. The water was ice cold, but I didn't flinch as I stepped under the spray. My hands braced against the wall, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I scrubbed my skin raw, trying to wash away the night, the memories, the weight of every decision that had led me here. But no amount of soap, no amount of water could cleanse me of what I had done. My eyes got heavy. By the time I emerged, the mirror was fogged, my reflection a blurred, distorted version of the woman I had been just days ago. I stared at myself, at the hollow eyes, the parted lips, the red marks where I had scrubbed too hard, and for the first time, I saw the truth. I had been chasing a lie, and I had lost myself in the process. Reflection, 1,000 words. Morning came too quickly, the thin motel curtains doing little to block out the light streaming through the window. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, my body stiff, my mind heavy. My first instinct was to reach for my phone, to check for messages, to search for some kind of acknowledgement that I still existed in someone's world. But I stopped myself. What was I expecting? A text from Daniel asking if I was okay? A call from Liam making weak promises I already knew were lies? I had been a fool to believe that either of them had truly cared. Danielle had known. He had watched me destroy myself, had set a trap and waited patiently for me to step into it. And Liam? Liam had never been mine to begin with. I had been reckless, selfish, stupid. But the worst part? I wasn't even sure I regretted it. I had spent years living in the shadow of a marriage that had become nothing more than routine. I had smiled when I was supposed to, played the role of the devoted wife, convinced myself that comfort was enough, that security was the same as happiness. But it wasn't. And when Liam came along, when he looked at me like I was something more than just a wife, just an accessory to someone else's life, I let myself believe in the fantasy. I had risked everything for it. And I had lost. But maybe I needed to. Maybe this was the only way I could finally wake up. I sat up slowly, my muscles aching from a night of tossing and turning, my head pounding with the remnants of exhaustion and regret. I needed to leave, needed to figure out what came next. I wasn't sure where to go. Home wasn't an option. Daniel had made that clear. I could go to a friend's house, but what would I even say? That I had ruined my marriage for a man who had never intended to choose me? That I had willingly set fire to the only life I had ever known, only to watch it turn to ashes in my hands? I grabbed my purse, slipping on the same dress from last night, cringing at the way it smelled like Liam, like mistakes I couldn't take back. As I stepped out of the motel room, the sun was already high. The city moving around me like nothing had changed, like the world hadn't just crumbled beneath my feet. I needed to disappear. I needed to start over. And for the first time in my life, I had no one to tell me how. Finale, 1,000 words. The cafe was quiet, the hum of conversation blending into the clinking of mugs and the low murmur of jazz playing from the speakers. I stirred my coffee absently, watching the steam rise in slow, lazy curls, my thoughts just as tangled. I had been here for hours, sitting in the corner, watching the world move around me, trying to piece together what came next. I had no job, no home, no plan, just a single suitcase in the trunk of my car and the clothes on my back. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something else entirely: relief. For the first time in years, I had no obligations, no expectations weighing me down. I had spent so much of my life trying to be what everyone else needed: Daniel's wife, the perfect hostess, the woman who smiled at the right moments and played her part flawlessly. But now, for the first time, I had no script. I could go anywhere, be anyone. A quiet vibration against the table pulled me from my thoughts. My phone, a single message flashing on the screen. Liam, I owe you an explanation. A slow, bitter smile curled at my lips as I stared at the words. He still thought I was the woman who needed closure, who would meet him one last time just to hear his empty apologies, his rehearsed justifications. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I locked my phone, setting it face down on the table before taking another slow sip of my coffee. Liam was my mistake to make, but he was also my lesson to learn. And I had learned. I had spent my whole life waiting for someone else to define me, to make me feel like I was worth something. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't running back to Daniel. I wasn't chasing after Liam. I was choosing myself for the first time. And this time, I wasn't looking back. The days passed in a blur of anonymity. I drifted through the city, staying in motels, drinking too much coffee in quiet cafes, watching strangers go about their lives while I tried to figure out what the hell to do with mine. I didn't speak to Daniel. I ignored every message Liam sent, every weak attempt at an apology, at an explanation. I wanted to disappear, to wipe the slate clean and start over as someone new, someone unburdened by the weight of my mistake. But the past has a way of finding you. It happened on a Wednesday, just as I was beginning to believe I could move on. I was sitting by the window of a small bookstore cafe, flipping through a novel I had no real intention of reading, when I saw him, Liam, standing on the sidewalk across the street, his phone in his hand, his eyes scanning the crowd like he was looking for something. Or someone. My pulse spiked, my fingers tightening around the edges of the book. I hadn't told him where I was, hadn't responded to a single one of his messages, hadn't left a trace of where I had gone. And yet, here he was. A chill crept down my spine. I forced myself to remain still, to keep my breathing even, my expression neutral as I watched him through the glass. He looked different, not the confident, smooth-talking man I had fallen for, but tense, unsettled, his eyes darting, his lips pressed into a thin line. I should have been angry, should have felt violated that he had come looking for me. But what I felt instead was something darker, something like fear. I reached for my bag, ready to slip out the back door, but before I could stand, my phone buzzed. Liam, we need to talk, it's important. I exhaled sharply, my stomach twisting as I debated my next move. I could keep running, keep pretending that none of this mattered, that he didn't matter, or I could face whatever truth he was so desperate to tell me. I hesitated for only a moment before standing. The alley behind the cafe was quiet, the city sounds muffled by the thick brick walls. The moment I stepped outside, Liam was there, waiting. "You're hard to find," he said, his voice strained, his eyes scanning my face like he was trying to memorize me. "I wasn't trying to be found," I shot back, keeping my distance. Liam ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I get it. You don't want to see me, you don't want to hear what I have to say. But Emily, you need to listen to me. Just this once." I crossed my arms, my jaw tightening. What could you possibly say that would change anything? You used me, Liam. You made me believe it wasn't supposed to be like this. he interrupted, his voice rough, urgent. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. A cold weight settled in my chest. Didn't know what? Liam hesitated, glancing over his shoulder like he was making sure no one was listening. When he looked back at me, his expression was unlike anything I had ever seen from him before. Not cocky, not confident, not in control. Terrified. This wasn't just about us, he said, his voice low. It wasn't just about an affair, about me leading you on, about Daniel finding out. It was more than that. You were a pawn, Emily, and so was I. My pulse stuttered, the words not making sense. What are you talking about? Liam stepped closer, lowering his voice. Rebecca, my wife, she and Daniel, they planned this. The ground beneath me tilted. I shook my head, trying to grasp onto something, anything that could make sense of what he was saying. That's not possible. That doesn't make any sense. But deep down, something inside me knew. Liam exhaled, his jaw tightening. They wanted you to fall. They wanted to ruin you. Rebecca has always known about my affairs, Emily. She lets me do what I want because she knows, in the end, I'll always come back to her. But this time, it was different. This time, she and Daniel had something bigger. The world spun around me, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. They set you up, Liam continued, his voice dripping with regret. They knew we'd meet, knew we'd be drawn to each other, knew that I wouldn't be able to resist. And the second you gave in, the second you crossed that line, they had everything they needed. I swallowed, my throat dry, my entire body trembling. Needed for what? Liam hesitated, and that hesitation sent a cold wave of dread crashing over me. For Daniel's divorce case, he admitted finally. For the company. For the money. Emily, he wanted out of the marriage, but he didn't want to lose anything in the process, so he gave you just enough rope to hang yourself. And I played right into it. The nausea hit me so fast I thought I might collapse. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a takedown. I staggered back, pressing a hand against the cold brick wall, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. No, he wouldn't do that to me. But the moment the words left my lips, I knew I was lying to myself. Daniel had never been the doting, devoted husband I had once convinced myself he was. He had been calculated, controlled. He had played the long game while I had been blind, wrapped up in my own loneliness, in my own desperation to feel something again. I had been so easy. Liam reached for me, but I jerked away. Emily, I swear, I didn't know. I thought I was just another cheating husband, but when I saw them together, when I overheard them talking, I cut him off, my voice like steel. You were part of it, whether you knew or not. Liam's face twisted, pain flickering in his expression. I know, and I hate myself for it. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, I wanted to burn down everything they had ever built, to tear apart the lives of the people who had destroyed mine. But instead I straightened, inhaling deeply, forcing my body to steady. You said they got what they needed, I murmured, my voice eerily calm. So what now? They just walk away, happily ever after? Liam hesitated, but I already knew the answer. Rebecca would stay with him. Daniel would take everything, and I would be nothing more than a footnote in the perfect little story they had written for themselves. But I wasn't going to let them win. I lifted my chin, the fire in my chest burning hotter than the rage in my veins. I made one mistake, Liam. He swallowed. What's that? I stepped closer, meeting his gaze with a cold, unwavering stare. I played by their rule. A slow smirk curved my lips, the gears in my mind already turning, the pieces of my revenge already falling into place. That's over now. Liam's eyes flickered with something dark, something almost reverent. "What are you going to do?" I smiled, the kind of smile that held promises of ruin. "I'm going to rewrite the ending." I stood at the edge of the city, the skyline stretching out before me, a glittering illusion of opportunity and deception. The same city that had swallowed me whole, chewed me up, and spit me back out. Only this time, I wasn't broken, I wasn't ruined. I was something else entirely. The cool evening breeze brushed against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was clear for the first time in weeks, my purpose carved into my bones. I had spent so long being a pawn in someone else's game, being the woman who got played, who got discarded, but not anymore. I took one last look at the past I was leaving behind. The woman I used to be, the wife, the lover, the fool, was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, someone who had learned the hard way that love was just another lie people told to keep control. Daniel thought he had won. Rebecca thought she had won. Liam had been just another casualty, another piece of the game that had played itself out. But the real ending hadn't been written yet. I wouldn't run, I wouldn't disappear, I wouldn't let them walk away thinking they had destroyed me. I turned, my heels clicking against the pavement as I walked away, my pulse steady, my resolve unwavering. They had set me up. Now it was my turn. Goodbye, Emily, the wife. Hello, Emily, the player. And this time, I wasn't playing by anyone's rules but my own.